Hey everyone, Low Quality here. I've been theory crafting builds for about a week for Diablo 4, and even in that time, things have changed. So today I wanted to do something where I update you guys on the complexities of making builds, try to filter out that complexity so that it's in a super simple form, serve that to you guys, and I'm going to do that in the form of a Whirlwind leveling build. So by the end of this, you should be able to use this build on launch, and you also should be able to make tweaks to it if you wanted, as well as make similar builds in the future using your own skills. So let's get started. One concept I want to get out of the way right off the bat is additive versus multiplicative. It's something that may seem complicated, but when it comes to Diablo 4, it is super straightforward. All you need to worry about is whether or not the value has a plus or a times in front of it. If it has a times in front of it, it should be multiplicative. We'll see moving forward into Diablo 4 if things change, but basically, anything with a times is king. You want that, it's good to go. Anything with a plus in front of it is still pretty good, but how it works is it's additive, so it adds with all other values that have that plus in front of it, and then at the end of that addition, you then multiply your damage by that value. So when it comes to our Whirlwind builds, we can show off the nodes on our tree that are multiplicative. In this case, we have Slaying Strike, which is times 22.5% increased damage. Once again, the times multiplicative. We have Pit Fighter, once again, times 9% increased damage. We have Counter Offensive, which is, again, times 12% increased damage. When we go up to the Paragon board, which we'll touch on later, you'll see more examples of additive damage. So you see here plus 10% physical damage. You'll also get, I believe, additive damage on your gear. That will all add up into one group, and then you would multiply your damage at the end by that total number. So Blizzard tends to keep their systems more simple. So again, the real takeaway is multiplicative damage will always increase your damage by a good amount. Additive will increase it by an okay amount, and that should be your takeaway. The next core concept that I want to talk about in Diablo 4 is snapshotting, and it's another thing that's been talked to death. It may seem complicated to some people. At the moment, the biggest issue is that there's a lot of unknowns, but I just want to explain it really quickly with the Whirlwind build as the example, and it's super straightforward. So what snapshotting means is that if you have a channeled skill, can you do something at the start of your channeled skill to increase the damage of the entire duration of that skill? For Whirlwind, we have Aspect of the Expectant. Attacking enemies with a basic skill increases the damage of your next core skill by some amount. And in this case, that is a multiplicative increase, which is huge. The concept is you would attack with a basic attack 5, 10 times, whatever, get the bonus increase in damage, and then start channeling your Whirlwind. That is the snapshot that people are talking about. Now, if you continue channeling the Whirlwind, you should have that increased damage throughout the entire duration. It's super simple. There's nothing too complicated about it. The unknowns right now are what mechanics snapshot, which ones don't. We'll figure that more out when D4 actually launches, but once again, super simple, good example of the Whirlwind build's power. The next core concept I want to talk about is buff uptime, and in this case, we're going to start with the Berserking buff. For our Whirlwind builds, while you're leveling, mostly you're going to be getting Berserking from Warcry. So when you use Warcry, you gain Berserking for 4 seconds. And how you would calculate the uptime is you check the cooldown on Warcry versus how long you get Berserking for. And in this case, you got pretty shitty uptime. The goal would be to try to get it to 100%, right? Can you get Berserking all the time? Maybe. How you would do that is you would combine different mechanics. So another way to get Berserking is with Lunging Strike. Anytime you crit with Lunging Strike, you get Berserking for 1.5 seconds, right? So you take this in conjunction with the Warcry, in conjunction with Wrath of the Berserker, which gets you Berserking, and you kind of all add these elements together and you try to balance uptime, duration, and how you can keep it on your character. When it comes to the Whirlwind builds, the primary way we're going to keep Berserk going is with this aspect. Relentless Berserker's aspect, right? So it's going to be pretty core to the build. It's a lucky hit. Damaging an enemy with a core skill has up to a 40% chance to increase the duration of Berserking by 1, double this damage if it was a crit. We're going to be critting a ton. So we're going to constantly be adding 2 seconds to our Berserking buff, hopefully keeping it up as much as possible. That's one of the main buffs. The second buff is vulnerable. We're going to see that in a lot of places, and when it comes to the Whirlwind build, it's not super reliable on how we'll get vulnerable. Currently, Pressure Point is one of our only ways of accessing it. Once again, it's another lucky hit, and it just has a chance of, making enemies vulnerable. Whirlwind has a low lucky hit chance at 20%. It does hit a bunch, but it's still not like super reliable for a buff that we want to keep up as much as possible. So one of the things you can get, and we'll hit on it later on when we touch on glyphs, is Exploit. The additional bonus here says when an enemy is damaged by you, they become vulnerable for 3 seconds. This applies it once for 3 seconds. It can't be reapplied with this glyph, but it's just another way of getting vulnerable on the Whirlwind build, right? So once again, when it comes to the buff uptime, the core concepts, if you break it down, get the buff, try to keep it up with certain mechanics, and then try to diversify. So don't put all your eggs in one basket. Try to get that buff from different mechanics. The next concept up is one that I call the shout package. So basically, you'll see probably a few different Barbarian builds rocking this, and it is taking all of the shouts, so Rallying Cry, Challenging Shout, and War Cry, using them together, and then using these 2 affixes on your rings. Echoing Fury, which generates Fury per second while each shout is active, and Bold Chieftain's Aspect. Whenever you cast a shout skill, its cooldown is reduced per nearby enemy up to a maximum of 12 seconds, which is kind of crazy. The final addition is a glyph on the Paragon board called Martial. The additional bonus is after casting a shout skill, the active cooldown of every other shout skill is reduced by 1.2 seconds. So Martial is the one that really benefits from having all 3 shouts up, although Echoing Fury stacks with itself, and Bold Chieftain is just good regardless of how many shouts you're using. But yeah, this is going to get pretty meta. I don't think people are going to enjoy it long term. Maybe we'll see some things change over time, but that is the shout package. The next concept I want to touch on is the different types of glyphs. We've touched on the Paragon board a little bit in the video already, but I just want to go over the 2 kinds of glyphs that you're going to see and how they differ between each other. So the first one is going to be attribute scaling. Right off the bat here we have Exploit, and you can see at the top the line says for every 5 dexterity purchased, you deal plus some % increased damage to vulnerable targets. So how that is going to scale is per dexterity that you have within the range of that glyph. And as you can see, we're taking a good amount of dex nodes on the tree, and that's how you increase the scaling. Pretty straightforward. There's complexities in terms of like how much dexterity you have on certain boards, and that's kind of how Blizzard has made it interesting. But if we move on to the next type of node, which is basically just node scaling, it's something where you don't have to really worry about anything. So we look at the Martial glyph in this case. Gain plus 40% bonus to all magic nodes within range. So if we look at the magic nodes right now, we see they're 7% increased damage. If we increase the value of this, it's going to increase it now by 192%. We hover over it, and the damage now is doubled. So basically, this doesn't scale with any of the attributes in the area. It just scales the magic nodes nearby. There's another one that scales the rare nodes nearby. For the Bard class, it is the Thorns one. And similar to the attribute scaling one, it still does have a bonus. So you still want to meet like the bare minimum requirement for that bonus, but you don't want to stack overboard, right? So there's no benefit to having 45 strength compared to 40 when it comes to the Martial node. The Paragon board system, that's where most of the complexity comes, I feel, from Diablo 4. It is kind of cool. There's a lot of pathing you have to worry about. You'll probably see a lot of videos on that in the future, but I just wanted to touch on the glyphs real quick. When it comes to the Barbarian class, its core identity is built around this arsenal system. Basically, you can wield a bunch of weapons and then use those weapons for different skills. Part of the what comes with that is this technique slot. For the Whirlwind build, we're going to go over a few options, but for your build, you can kind of like pick and choose which ones work for you. The two-handed mace expertise seems pretty strong. You have a lucky hit of generating more fury, double if you're berserking, so we're going to try to keep as much berserking uptime as possible and gain as much fury as possible because we're going to be constantly channeling Whirlwind. It also has a multiplicative damage increase to your critical strike damage, which we have a ton of. So that's pretty huge. The other option is, I believe, at least two-handed axe expertise. It again has a multiplicative damage increase and then plus crit chance if you need it. You get a lot of crit chance from Dire Whirlwind, up to 80% on a two-hander, so I feel like you're not going to need this. But while leveling, it might get you from 90% to 100, which could be huge. So those are your two options. You can decide what you want to go with while you're leveling. One of the major decisions that you have to make as a Whirlwind Barb is between your key passives. The first being Unconstrained, which is increase Berserk's maximum duration by 5 seconds and increase its damage bonus by plus 25%. This is one option. This is basically an increase in damage, but it is not a huge increase in damage. You would take this if you can't sustain this next one, which is Unbridled Rage. Core skills deal 135% increased damage, times 135%. Multiplicative, huge damage, but they cost times 100% more. So this is basically saying spend double and get more than double damage out of it. It is pretty hard to keep this up, so as you're leveling, you can decide, do I have enough Fury regen to keep this up? If I don't, let's just go Unconstrained. And honestly, while you're leveling, you won't really need 135% increased damage. Probably just with Unconstrained, you'll be killing anything regardless, so, you know, it's a toss-up. Feel it out. In the end game, you do want to trend towards Unbridled Rage if you can pull it off, but until then, Unconstrained, totally fine. Real quick that I want to touch on is movement speed. I'm taking 3 points in swiftness, which is just a flat 12% increased movement speed. This is something that you might overlook. You might think, oh, I'm going to put points in damage reduction, like Challenging Shout, leveling that up, or more damage, like No Mercy. You've got other options like attack speed, weapon fury, etc. There's a lot of different options you can put your points into. Why put it into movement speed? Well, if you have movement speed before you get the mount in the game, it's insane because you're walking everywhere, right? Diablo 4's world is massive, and just a 12% increased movement speed. Once you get it, you're gonna feel like you won't know how to play without it. So most builds, hopefully, if you can fit this in, do it. And then when it comes to boots, there's a lot of affixes that increase your speed. One of these is probably decent to take with the Whirlwind builds. Critical Strikes grant movement speed is pretty strong. And then honestly, the Unstoppable and for 4 seconds after increase in movement speed is also very strong. Both of these affixes are fantastic. But just because of how big the Diablo 4 world is, like this isn't like a min-max thing I'm suggesting. Like, oh, you need to go as fast as possible. This is very much a quality of life thing. It just feels better to move around faster. Cool, so we're getting close to the ends. The final topic that I want to hit on, which is a big one, it goes back to additive and multiplicative, and it kind of breaks the game, is this concept of uniques. I'm going to be posting 2 builds. One is going to be the leveling build that you take. Every single affix on that build is going to be a legendary affix. You're not going to be using any uniques. Some of them you can get by just clearing dungeons. Other ones you will actually have to drop the item, so there is a little bit of luck that you have to get while you're leveling. But it isn't as much luck as these uniques. So they drop later in the game, and I'll just pull one up, and you can kind of see the crazy power of it. So we're going to be looking at the Grandfather. The Grandfather has this bottom line that says other properties of this weapon can roll higher than normal, right? What that means is that like the stats on it are much higher than a normal item. That's already a huge benefit. The top line though is fucking crazy, right? Increases your critical strike damage by times some percentage. In this case, 100% at the max. Remember, times. Times is insane. This is a multiplicative damage increase to your critical strike damage. Go to the Paragon board, and you look at the nodes on your tree. Can you get increased critical strike damage? Yes. If you get a bunch of flat critical strike damage, and then you rock the Grandfather, you essentially double it. It's crazy, right? You compare that to the other options that you can put in the slot, which what we had before was Limitless Rage. This at max can do 60% increased damage, right? So it's the situation of how much more damage are these uniques adding to your build versus the legendary affixes that you have in the slots. The Grandfather is a good example of that, but to me, the best example is Magnum Opus. So Magnum Opus is this one-handed weapon. Skills using this weapon deal 0.1 to 0.3% increased damage per point of fury you have, but you lose 2 fury every second. The issue with this item is that this is again a multiplicative damage increase. So this item has to compete with other affixes in this spot, right? So this I already showed, it was a legendary affix. It was only 60% increased damage. 0.3% per point of fury means that if you can get up to 300 fury maximum, that is 100% damage increase total. There is no other legendary affix that you can possibly get that's going to be 100% more multiplier. So Magnum Opus is, I believe, guaranteed to be best in slot if you can get enough fury and if you can sustain the debuff it comes with, right? I haven't heard people talking about this too much. I do believe this will be the best Whirlwind build possible. I'm not sure how dual wield works with Whirlwind. It might be unsustainable when it comes to spending fury, so that might kill it. But when it comes to this item, I feel like the strongest builds for Barbarians in the game will be using this item. I'm pretty confident to say that. There are a few other really strong uniques. The Heart of Selig is actually really strong in conjunction with Magnum Opus, but it's more on the defensive side. So you can get increased maximum resource using it, which is huge. But then the downside / upside is that it drains your resource every time you take damage, right? So if you have high enough resource regeneration, this is an insane defensive layer that you can take. It basically can make you unkillable if you're constantly regenerating resource. But because you're using Whirlwind, because maybe you're using Unbridled Rage, it costs twice as much, you're decaying because you have Magnum Opus on, there's going to be a balance here. But these items together are insane. Grandfather by itself is insane, and I'm trying to see... There's another pair of Pants Temerity that is very interesting, right? So the Pants slot is actually our weakest slot in terms of legendary affixes. You won't really have to worry about what options you put there. It's mostly defensive. But the unique pants in the slot have a very interesting effect, right? Effects that heal you beyond 100% grant you barrier. Why does that matter? So why does that matter, right? And that matters because there is an affix that is a multiplicative damage increase while you have barrier active, right? So essentially it takes your pants slot, which is normally just a defensive affix, and it kind of twists it into a offensive affix potentially. This only works if you have the slots for it. So basically the suggestion would be if you get those pants first, you can now start running conceded aspect somewhere. If you already have some of these other uniques, you probably can't fit this in the builds. You'll just run out of room for affixes, or there will be better ones than conceded available to you. So that wraps it up on uniques mostly. The other ones are pretty strong, but it's more complicated to determine how much damage increase they come with because a lot of them have plus skills tied to them. But yeah, my recommendation is if you can make a Magnum Opus build work, it will be king in the long run. How I want to wrap the video up is with a bunch of unknowns. People have been talking about a lot of theory lately. Some of it has been disproven, some of it has been proven. But when it comes to the Whirlwind stuff, I just want to go over the stuff that I don't know. So I mentioned dual wield versus two-hand. It sounds like there's something going on with dual wields and Whirlwind. It's either attack speed oriented, or it's just like a dual wield versus two-hand mechanic. I don't really know, but basically I think dual wielding makes Whirlwind cost more resources. Attack speed also might make Whirlwind cost more resource. So the faster you use Whirlwind, the faster you use the channeled skill, the more resource it eats up. I'm not really sure. That's something that I don't think you should worry about while leveling. Going a two-handed slashing weapon with Whirlwind while leveling is probably totally fine. The only time you would ever swap, in my opinion, is if you get Magnum Opus. Another option when it comes to this Whirlwind build that I'm unsure of is these two affixes here that are pretty strong. Anemia and Skullbreakers. So first off, Anemia is a lucky hit to deal direct damage, basically stun enemies that are bleeding, right? So it's a lucky hit, you get a chance to stun. Skullbreaker's aspect is whenever you stun a bleeding enemy, deal a percentage of their bleed to them as physical damage. So once again, these are aspects on your gear that you could potentially actually put on, I feel like your boots maybe. It's a situation where you may be able to put it into a slot that normally would only have defensive or utility aspects, and turn it into some kind of damage. Skullbreakers I feel like is more offensive, so that's why you can only get it on the gloves here. So normally this isn't the best by itself, but in conjunction with Anemia it's pretty good. I don't know how good. I don't know if this combo matters. Whirlwind's going to be strong without it, so it's more of just something that you can kind of mess around with. Another unknown for me is Exploiters. So again, this is on the chest piece. Normally you can't get damage there. And it has a multiplicative damage increase to enemies that are unstoppable. And what does that mean? When is an enemy unstoppable? I don't know. I think it's after they get stunned like way too much. I don't know how common that is. It also may be bosses, right? Like I think bosses are unstoppable. You can eventually stack up enough stagger so that they do get stunned. But I don't know if that counts as like, I think they may be always unstoppable. I don't know. Pull up Berserk Ripping, which is another affix that I'm unsure of. So Berserk Ripping is whenever you deal direct damage while berserking, inflict 30% of the base damage dealt as bleeding over 5 seconds. So this is like, what is base damage? I don't know. Is it your damage before you crit? Is it your weapons base damage, which is super low? Is it your damage after the fact where it's at the very end? Like I have no idea. So going to D4 launch, we'll figure out how good this is if you need it. Normally I feel like this would be for applying bleed. When it comes to our leveling Whirlwind builds, you're just going to be using Furious Whirlwind, so you get bleed built in. So I would not worry about that one too much. And then the final one, which kind of ties into another concept, is Earthquake. And it is not the defensive Earthquake. It is the offensive Earthquake affix. So the Earthquake aspect is Ground Stomp creates an Earthquake damaging enemies for some amount of damage, which is, it's not going to matter. But the benefit is when standing in Earthquakes, you deal, again, a multiplicative times 15% increased damage. This is a decent multiplicative affix that you can have, and it's a reason why you might want to run Ground Stomp, right? Ground Stomp itself is super straightforward. You just stun. If you need to trigger stuns, it's good. But the real kicker is Strategic Ground Stomp. Reduce the cooldown of your ultimate skill by 1 second for each enemy damaged by Ground Stomp. This is insane. So if you're running Wrath of the Berserker and you're not running Unbridled Rage, you may be okay just giving up one of your shouts. So while leveling, maybe you don't need Challenging Shout. Or while leveling, you might not need Warcry. And maybe you're just willing to give up these points, put them into Ground Stomp, and then use that to trigger Wrath of the Berserker more often than you normally would, right? It's an option, and if you want to do it, I would suggest you take Earthquake aspect as well. Just another multiplier. I don't know. Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. who knows? There's a lot that I don't know when it comes to Diablo 4 at the moment. I'll try to go back and update these videos over time, or just like add new videos in the future once I know more. But that about wraps it up. I will post once again the build below. It's going to be a default build with just legendary affixes, and then a secondary build, probably a two-hander with uniques, and then a dual wield with uniques, just to kind of give you guys options. And this is knowing what I know now, basically knowing the difference between multiplicative and additive, and then just kind of looking at our various options. So thanks for stopping by once again. If you have any comments, if you have any concerns with the builds that I'm showing off, let me know. I hunted down the right answers on my own, so some of my past videos, the suggestions I was putting out were like, okay, but you know, if you guys let me know, I'll get to the right conclusion a little bit faster. Whatever works. Thanks for following along, and again, I'll keep doing these videos going up into D4's launch. I'll continue them after the fact, so eventually I am going to be playing this build on launch. I'll update videos with gameplay. We'll see where we're at in a week's time, in 2 weeks' time, and we'll move on from there. So thanks again. I'll catch you guys next time.